Welcome to Happily Ever Aftermath, the podcast that explores the movies that influenced how we view love and romantic relationships. Yes, there will be spoilers. I'm your host, Diana Rojek Skonnord. You're cuter than I thought. I can see why she likes you.
Who?
Not too bright, though.
Whoa.
We're talking about The Matrix from 1999 and subsequently The Matrix Resurrections from 2021 and the Neo to my Trinity. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, honey.
Yes.
Is here. Hi, Ryan.
Hi. Good to be here.
Okay. So lots have happened to where you said, no, I think I asked you, do you think you might want to talk about The Matrix?
Yeah, it was a bit of a journey to get here.
Much like the movies themselves.
Yeah, The Matrix was much like most everyone in my generation. The Matrix was definitely an impactful, you might even say formative movie from my teenage years. Definitely had big impact on the film industry, where like kind of the entire action genre changed after that. But there are probably other podcasts that could describe that better than I'm equipped to.
Yeah, that's not really why we're here right now.
Yeah, but I mean, needless to say, it was this big cultural landmark movie, and I think it was like personally resonant for me, maybe let's say an above average amount. But I never really thought to bring it to this podcast, just because the romance aspect of it was pretty secondary in the way that I kind of viewed the story. I'm not saying it was bad or poorly done, but
no, I'm surprised it was secondary. I would have imagined it would be further down on the list. First, the story. Second, the spiritual implications. Third, bullet time. Fourth,
platonic
the
philosophy.
outfits.
Yeah.
Fifth, the posters.
Yeah, it's
Then the action.
Yeah, I mean, Diana, we were chatting about this a little bit, that it's like depending on which angle you're looking at it, it can sort of feel like it fits naturally into the story or it doesn't, because there's like, you think of the archetype of like a kind of, bad cheesy action movie where there's this romantic subplot that just feels kind of bolted on, like,
like Die Hard.
Like the filmmakers had, no, not like Die Hard. That is integral to the themes of, anyway.
No, I know.
Yeah, I know, but your listeners might think you're being serious.
Oh, yeah, they might
if
think
this is their first episode.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, if it is their first episode, let me actually get into this part of it from IMDb.
Okay, I want to finish my thought later, but go ahead.
When I'm done with IMDb.
Yes.
When a beautiful stranger leads computer hacker Neo to a forbidding underworld, he discovers the shocking truth. The life he knows is the elaborate deception of an evil cyber intelligence.
For both of you who haven't actually seen The Matrix already.
And who are listening to this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if you haven't, spoilers for all of the movies of The Matrix. Not the Animatrix, because I have nothing to contribute.
Yeah. We are going to be spoiling The Matrix Resurrections, which only came out last year, in addition to the classics. So,
which is actually why we're talking about this, which is interesting.
Yeah, we'll get into that also in a moment. But Diana has a cast list here.
The aforementioned Woe speaker Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss are going to be the topics of our discussion.
Appearing in both movies.
Laurence Fishburne appearing in 3 out of 4. Hugo Weaving, 3 out of 4. Joe Pantoliano, who is, kind of important to The Matrix, 1999.
Joey Pants, as you used to call him.
I still do. I just didn't want to do that.
It hasn't come up recently.
No. And written and directed by Lana and Lilly Wachowski.
Yes, and
go ahead.
And Matrix Resurrections, written and directed by Lana Wachowski only. Lilly was not credited, and
Lilly didn't participate.
Yeah, I know. Not to my knowledge. If she participated, it was on a private behind the scenes basis, I guess. But yes,
it was my understanding that it was. Oh, that's an interesting point. Siblings do tend to...
I'm sure they at least had a conversation about it.
It was my understanding. Yes, it's just like, I want nothing to do with this. I'm out.
Yeah, I think you read about that a little bit more than I did. Anyway, yes, listen to Diana.
4 sentences.
Rounding out the supporting cast in Matrix Resurrections, we had Neil Patrick Harris, Jessica Henwick, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Jonathan Groff, Priyanka Chopra Jonas, and Christina Ricci. plus a few other. I'm going to try to minimize spoilers here. So yeah, there's a few returning cast members, but that's not germane to what we're going to be talking about. So
right,
if you haven't seen it,
Oh, and you just actually reminded me of something involving the rules of what happens next, but we'll carry on about that in a different segment.
Yes,
in the future segment. Okay, so back to the thought you wanted to finish that I completely derailed.
Right, about the significance of the romantic subplot in The Matrix, the original movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and much more so than in the sequels. I kind of felt like the more they progressed this franchise, the more the relationship between Neo and Trinity kind of developed, which was good and natural because you need ways. You need to, as you're making sequels, you need to find ways for the characters to grow and for new stuff to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But in the first movie, it was, I wouldn't go so far as to say it felt like one of those, romantic subplots that kind of got bolted onto the side of the story just because the filmmakers felt like they needed to check a box. It felt organic enough, but also not that central to the main story. The main plot was more about the kind of, progression of Neo coming to understand this world and his relationship with Morpheus as in the role of the, kind of teacher and mentor. And, so for those who haven't read some of the analysis and criticism of The Matrix, there's a lot going on in terms of philosophy and kind of religious allegories. Taken one way, Neo is kind of like a Christ figure. In some other ways, it's kind of representing, Buddhist philosophies. And it, it is kind of weird to think, the Christ or Buddha figure also having a girlfriend kind of, dilutes the allegory.
You've just upset so many Christians with that concept.
Right.
Jesus had a girlfriend. Jesus had a girlfriend.
Yeah, but it does viewing the movie from a certain angle, Trinity almost seems kind of unnecessary, and from another angle, she's very organically integral to the story. So,
and I would also say that I like teamwork.
Yeah,
I don't like the idea of just one person is responsible for all of this, which is actually not even
the
just
one.
Well,
the one person. Yes.
And how much does that kind of really tie into just people's narcissism, which is I'm the one,
Right.
And I am the Neo.
Yeah, there was I don't know, the following decade or so, there was a bit of a backlash against these, movies that kind of use the prophecy or the chosen one as a plot device,
Right. But yeah, no, Morpheus definitely did some shit.
Yeah.
Trinity definitely did some shit.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as we hate to, say this, Cypher. We need the. I'm sorry. We can't have a resurrection if we don't have a Judas.
Right.
I'm mixing all of this together. So
yeah. So So some immediate backstory here. Actually, before the immediate backstory, I guess, did we want to talk about our early experiences with the film?
Yeah.
I saw The Matrix in the theaters. I remember I was excited to see it based on the promos do you remember the promos, by the way? The fact that they actually did a really good job kind of concealing the core, concept and revelations of the movie. It was kind of that line, "What is the Matrix?" They were kind of using it as a tagline, and the commercials and the trailers and stuff did not expose the basic premise of the movie. The whole business about a person discovers that he's living inside a computer simulation. There was nothing about that. It was just, kind of some snippets of dialogue and the action scenes. And if you had a guess of, what the Matrix was, it was the Matrix must be whatever is giving you all of these kung fu bullet dodging superpowers. If you tap into the Matrix, it lets you do these crazy gun battles, which is sort of true, but very far from the complete story.
Right.
So yeah, most of us who saw this movie in theaters in 1999 were going in very blind, and I'm grateful that the movie was advertised that way because it definitely made more of an impact. And I saw it with a cousin, an older cousin, who she had already seen it, and she was like, "Oh yeah, all the hype, it totally lives up to the hype. You need to see this. I'm taking you to go see this." When she was kind of in town visiting for the weekend.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I unfortunately I think my absorbing of the whole Matrix thing was the fact that there were a lot of people in my high school wearing trench coats. And so it's just like, oh, they saw the Matrix, and that was probably true, but I don't know. And for the most part, I didn't see it, I believe, until you showed it to me when we were dating. I'm not positive. Wow. I don't know if I saw the Matrix before I met you. But I honestly, I can't tell because that was a long time ago.
I want to say you had seen it, but we might have watched it together.
I don't know, it seems like the kind of thing that we would have watched on your little 13-inch combination VCR TV combo.
Right, with my PlayStation 2 acting as the DVD player.
I don't know if we might have watched it on VHS. I doubt it.
I never owned it on VHS. Oh, actually, that was a big thing at the time. That was like kind of controversial because they released it only on DVD, not VHS, and that was like part of like the very first vanguard of movies doing that. And for a lot of people, it was kind of like the motivation to acquire a DVD player because you weren't going to be able to watch The Matrix at home otherwise.
Weird. There's a glitch in my Matrix because I can imagine people owning it on VCR, owning it on VHS, and did that exist?
It might have much later, but I definitely remember a big kerfuffle about how the initial release was only on DVD.
I'm not trusting my memories, and this is so.
Yeah,
it's so much in pop culture.
Showing you The Matrix for the first time seems like something I would remember doing, so I'm pretty sure you had seen it without me for the first time.
Well, there you have it. I don't know when I saw this for the first time. Not the first time.
That is uncanny, just because, like, for so many of us, it was a very memorable viewing experience. I can remember all sorts of little details. So suffice it to say, it didn't have that much of an impact on you. Maybe it's a gender thing. I don't know.
Well, it could be one of those situations where, maybe, like, okay, let me put it to you this way. Why are we talking about this movie? So I can finish my thoughts.
Okay, so...
Or why are we talking about this movie right now?
Well, we saw The Matrix Resurrections in the theater.
Yep. That was a that was a Christmas present to you.
Yeah, oh yeah. You got me the tickets in advance, and we braved the pandemic conditions because it was still kind of... Yeah, we were wearing masks in the theater and felt mostly okay about it at the time, but it's still...
So I picked very strategic empty time slots.
Yeah, continues to feel dicey, but... I was definitely excited to see that. It had a certain amount of build-up, like the fact that they were even making a fourth Matrix movie in the first place was a little bit baffling to a lot of people, because I'll reiterate the spoiler alert here, but both Neo and Trinity were dead at the end of the third movie, hence the title, Matrix Resurrections. There had to be some sort of bringing them back to life plot device of some kind, but no one really knew what that was until the movie came out. And the hype was definitely amplified by the fact that they were doing a lot of on-location filming right in our own backyard in the city of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And, various streets would get closed down at times. There'd be lots of rumors about, whether they were filming for The Matrix, and people would, talk about spotting Keanu Reeves out on the street. And there was one particular street closure that we encountered on our way to see a show one evening that I think we at first thought it was for The Matrix Resurrections, but it turned out to be... What was that for? It was like a...
Oh, shoot. I was not Bosch, the Amazon show that's not Bosch. It's the one with Billy Bob Thornton in it.
With Billy Bob Thornton. Okay, yeah, that's right. I was trying to remember. I almost said Nicolas Cage, but that doesn't sound right.
Is it Billions?
Yeah, something like that.
Yep. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, and yeah. Oh, and speaking of San Francisco, I was also pleasantly surprised to see that the Matrix world in the Matrix Resurrections, which was sort of like the rebooted aftermath of all the cataclysmic events that happened in the third movie. There was like this new iteration of the Matrix that happened afterward, and within that, it was set in this the Matrix-y version of the city of San Francisco, which was particularly interesting because the first movie, or the first three movies, were set in like no particular American city that like bore a strong resemblance to Chicago, but wasn't officially Chicago. And actually most of the city stuff was filmed in Sydney.
I think what happened is that they put the Chicago color filter on.
Right.
So I'm just like, yeah, this feels like Chicago.
Yeah, exactly.
Been there exactly once in my life.
Yeah. But if you... if you freeze frame and look at the small details, you'll find that the city is never named anywhere, and the all the license plates on the cars I forget what they don't say the name of a state or anything. I think they might actually just have the words "the city" on them, but it's very subtle. But it's like this sort of like nameless, no particular location city, and then we sit down for the fourth movie, and all of a sudden, not only does the location have a name, but it's the actual real life place where we're from, with the familiar skyline and the Salesforce Tower and everything.
Well, he's a programmer in the first one, but then in this one, he is a video game creator, we'll say. I'm not gonna say
kind
designer.
Of a visionary designer and also a programmer. He's
right. Sure. So that's a lot of information. So all of that was to say,
right, and then what got it on our minds right now is that we also just again in San Francisco saw this performance by the San Francisco Symphony,
also a Christmas present.
That was a very special event where they were screening The Matrix, the original one, the 1999 film, with the symphony orchestra performing the score with live instruments, and conducted by the actual composer, Don Davis, which rather embarrassingly, we did not realize that was him as the guest conductor until like the end of until I think we saw it on an ad on our way out.
No, what happened is that people started really, really clapping when his name came up in the credits, and I'm just like, okay, I mean, I guess we're giving a nod to the composer.
Why not? Why not applaud the composer?
Yeah, why not applaud the composer?
Physically present, but then learned he was present. That was him right there.
We thought it was just like a nod to the music person. Yeah.
Right.
But I believe he turned around and bowed when that happened.
Yes. That started to make a bit more sense.
Oh.
So if I'd known that going in, I would have I would have maybe tempered my expectations for all the parts that aren't orchestral music, like the famous music that plays over the lobby shootout scene, which I think was actually a song by the Propeller Heads that predated the movie, and a couple of other scenes. It's like, are they going to do like orchestral reinterpretations of those? Because that sounds awesome. One of my very favorite things in the world is like an orchestral cover of a techno song or like an electro pop song.
I know, that's why you love Bridgerton so much.
Sure. They did not, in fact, do that. But once I knew that it was Don Davis is only conducting the music that he actually composed, okay, that actually is a much more sensible heuristic. Sorry, you're trying to say something.
Well, let me back up a couple of steps on why we did The Matrix. And I'd like to point out that I did not have this whole Matrix themed Christmas for you, even though it seems like I did. What actually happened is that Ryan and I have never been to a symphony before. And
I've been bugging you about it for years, right?
I don't know if you've been bugging me about it, but it is something that you've wanted to do. And I'm just like, honey, the same way you don't like going to a podcast festival and just sitting there and it's just like, yep, they're talking. And it's just like, I feel like I need to be folding laundry or something while this is happening. But instead I'm trapped in here and I'm just going to look at the playbill again and then go look up again. And then, oh, they're still playing. Awesome. I'm sure this is beautiful. My attempt to try to mitigate that uncomfortableness is just like, hey, if a movie's playing, then oh, there's a whole series, awesome,
right? So
honey,
then you engage the eyes as well as the ears,
engaging the eyes as well as the ears,
attending a movie, which is more familiar for you.
Not to mention, I didn't want to go somewhere where I do believe I told my coworker this, like, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable going to the symphony. It's gonna be like, I'm gonna be walking Rodeo Drive, they're gonna take one look at me and say, excuse me, ma'am, you don't belong here.
Yeah, and that's actually part of the reason that I've been bugging you to go to the symphony for a long time, is that the tickets are one of those things that you would assume that they're actually a lot more expensive than they are, especially if you sit in like the crappy seats, although in this case we weren't. You actually got me some very good seats.
Oh, they're crappy in terms of they were like in the last row, but we weren't in the balcony, but there's nothing wrong with the balcony.
And I will be eternally grateful that without intending to, but nonetheless, you sat me in seat number 101, which is just, I kind of squealed a little bit when I saw that, because fans of the movie will probably understand the significance of that. But,
and I was just like, we're close to the exit, and so I like to get to the bathroom quickly. But it turns out there was an intermission, and I'm an idiot because it turns out there's an intermission.
Yeah.
So I left in the middle of the movie because I had to, with a mask on for so long, my throat started to get all like, and I'm not going to be that person in the middle of a performance. So I went, found a water fountain, and then 4 seconds later, after I came back, intermission. I'm like, oh.
That's sparked a whole conversation about how you wish like all movies had intermissions.
I'm not so sure about that. Well, we create our own intermission at home. where it's
Right.
like, pause it. But I will note that we were originally supposed to see Skyfall.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there was a series of circumstances where you got sick, but then you were okay. But then I was like, I can't go because now I don't feel well. Not that I was sick, but
so
I was
bottom line is the Matrix themed Christmas did not happen on purpose.
It
but,
was an accident. But one of the things, and I
was merely getting to see the Matrix again in a theatrical setting with people would have been a wonderful experience. And the symphony orchestra was just like incredible icing on that cake. So,
and as we were leaving, and we discovered, oh my God, this is the actual composer for it. You were geeking out the whole time. First of all, the 101 seat was just like, and I'm like, honey, I know you love this movie, but again, I'm not. You said, wow, you really don't remember the first time you saw The Matrix? That's surprising about me. When you said, I'm like, honey, I know you love this movie. Is this top 5? And you're like, and I'm like, I did not. It didn't even process to me because I know you love Inception.
Sure.
And I just lean you on the Nolan. I think this got tucked away in all of the Nolan movies.
I must really have a thing for the whole imaginary worlds thing with the Inception and.
Well, I mean, where were you the first time you saw Inception? Oh wait, I was there. Never mind. So, it was just interesting to really process how much that was nice to find out. But I think even more importantly, I was really going with a little bit of cynicism because I remember rewatching it like on TV and I'm like, God, this is aged poorly. But I guess when you're that far back in a theater, what may be crappy CGI that I had thought was going to be seen, I'm just like, well, it doesn't look so bad this far back. Maybe I was too close to the screen the last time I saw it, or maybe it is better than I gave it credit for. And I was anticipating it looking really shitty.
I think it really holds up.
The movie definitely holds up. The CGI didn't look that horrible.
The CGI does. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people observing that like the CGI in the 2 sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions, was it was happening like on the cusp of or slightly before Blu-ray becoming popular, and like things that looked okay at the time, started to look really like kind of like, people's faces would get really plastic and rubbery when they were CGI'd in for some of the stunts.
Yeah.
And then if you're seeing it on a Blu-ray screen sitting at home.
It also might be that the action of this movie is wonderful, but compared to the next levels of just like, all right, we got to do it faster and we got to be more elaborate in the sequels. Mm-hmm. So when you go back to the first one, I'm just like, oh, this isn't terrible because they were very reasonable about what they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, there was a lot of craftsmanship in the stunts and the special effects in the original Matrix, and there's another thing a lot of people griped about, how it started leaning away from practical effects and practical stunts and more towards the CGI. Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, like we could probably fill an entire podcast talking about how influential it was in stunts and special effects. And part of what made The Matrix so special was that, well, for one thing, it started a really big trend of actors doing their own stunts. There were like months and months of kung fu training and like wired jump training for a lot of the principal cast, because they were doing way more of those scenes where traditionally stunt doubles would have been doing it. And even some of the like iconic special effects shot, like the bullet time shot, like that famous scene right at the beginning where the time freezes and the camera rotates around Trinity as she's about to kick a guy in the face. Mm-hmm. That was actual physical cameras pointed at Carrie-Anne Moss, and the way they achieved that shot was by putting an entire circle of cameras all around the room, each taking a single frame of film at the same time. The background was completely CGI, but the actors were real humans. Mm-hmm. And that, in a nutshell, is I think why that shot still holds up and looks as impressive today as it did in the 90s. So
yeah, it looks fine. It's annoying to see because it just got parodied 8,000 times.
That is not, yeah. It
looking at you, Shrek.
Friggin' Shrek. Yeah, that was like, I remember that feeling played out
and also
when
Charlie's
Shrek
Angels.
came out. Yeah, Charlie's Angels. I don't think that was a parody. I think it was just imitation.
Oh, sorry.
And then there was the movie Swordfish, which wanted to be The Matrix 2 so badly it was painful. But that's another topic.
I didn't bring it up.
I'm putting it back.
Alrighty. Yeah. So there is the long storied history of The Matrix why we're talking about The Matrix, and that leads us to, The Matrix Resurrections.
Yes.
You had mentioned that The Matrix didn't really have a whole, yep, there is a thing in there, and there's a love story, cool.
Yeah.
But we started talking about this on the way home.
Yeah.
In the symphony, and tell me more.
Well, yeah. So first things first, just talking about the movie itself. I know that in the fandom, The Matrix Resurrections was kind of a loved or hated prospect, and there are a lot of people, like diehard franchise fans and more casual filmgoers alike, who just did not care for this movie. And if you're in that group, I can understand it. Me, I was on the love it side of the love it or hate it prospect. I thought this movie was really good. I really liked what Lana Wachowski and the rest of the filmmakers were trying to do with it. I guess my sort of like critical thesis on like what is going on with this movie is like, if you so it's very metafictional. It's very much about itself. It's very kind of like cheekily wink and nudge, kind of like about the original movie franchise. And there's this whole conceit around that. I think the first 45 minutes of the movie were my favorite. The rest of it was still good, but not as much as I liked as the first 45 minutes of the movie, which is, this whole plot where Neo doesn't know he's back in the Matrix. He doesn't remember being Neo. He's just being called Thomas Anderson again, and he's this video game designer, and he's very famous and successful for making a video game series that is essentially the first three Matrix movies. And there's a whole lot of talk about that video game franchise among the characters that is meant to be understood as the audience is meant to understand it as actually talking about the movies that we're all familiar with, which, some people are gonna look at that and think like, oh, that's really cheesy. It's, too clever by half. I'm not amused by this little, meta fourth wall breaking joke. But, frankly, as a creative choice, I kind of respect it, especially because, there's one scene where they're kind of talking about like, we're being contractually forced to extend this franchise, even though we didn't really want to, which kind of like,
and they're talking about the video game in the movie that's supposed to be talking about this movie that we're watching right now. Yes.
And the video game that is owned by Warner Brothers, they actually dropped that name, which I thought was kind of funny. And I don't actually know if that was the case about like Warner Brothers twisting Lana Wachowski's arm. I don't think that's actually true, but
I believe that they were going to make this with or without the Wachowskis. So
there you go. Yeah, and I think that also paralleled what was happening in the story within the story.
You're right. He has to listen to this. I'm not sure if they were interns, but they were definitely throwing at the whole, like, he is the old man and having this younger generation tell him what needs to happen. And there is some credence in hearing new ideas when it comes to your own creations. But at the same time, though, they were just, I'm not going to say they were heavy-handed with it, but they were, I enjoyed it because for me, I didn't know what to expect with watching this movie. So the fact that they were being so meta about it, I'm like, this could annoy me in other circumstances, but right now I'm okay with this.
Yeah. And I,
actually, one of my favorite parts about watching this movie is I'm not really enjoying this, but I can feel Ryan enjoying this so much right now.
Yeah, I did. And I respect it as a creative choice and as an intellectual choice, because it's basically
it's still really interesting.
It was very personal. It was
absolutely.
It was, and it had real heart in it. And in fact, if we're going to kind of take something away from the sort of like read between the lines thesis of it, I think this is kind of like Lana Wachowski saying to us, like, this kind of like reflective, metafictional wink, wink, nudge, nudge self-commentary is the only way that you're going to get a Matrix movie that has heart and soul in it still. If it were, like there were a lot of fans who were like, oh, this is in no way a continuation. This is such a departure from the franchise. This doesn't have any of the appeal of the original. Like, if they tried,
people could say that. And either it's going to hit or miss.
I know. And if I think the message here is if they had tried to make that, like, A, they would have been making it without either of the Wachowskis, and B, it would have been
stale,
hollow and probably kind of crappy.
Stale, annoying, and like any other action movie, it's like, oh, I came here to watch this, and I didn't just want to, if I wanted this, I just would have watched another Marvel movie.
Yeah, so it's like, and I think I was sort of like primed for this because for those who are familiar with like the Twin Peaks revival, something very similar was going on, which is like if there's a reason for you to continue a story, but you really think that the story is done, instead just make the story an essay on how it shouldn't exist, which is like kind of what, and yeah, I'll link the YouTube video that I'm kind of borrowing that opinion from this video essay that's more or less arguing that that's what David Lynch did, not just with the revival of Twin Peaks, but basically like from the moment when Laura Palmer's killer was revealed onward, when everything got really weird in that series, and there was that intermediate movie called Firewalk with Me that was very much like in common with the Matrix Resurrections, that it was kind of like this basically like essay on how the story you loved can't be continued, and it's something else now. Of course, it was David Lynch, so it like you need a like symbolism glossary to even understand that's what he was going for. Well, Lana Wachowski at least was a little bit more transparent about it. So
and so what I think is unfortunate is that you have this movie, and if you're taking this from a business standpoint, The Matrix, people already know it, so they're already in. I'm like, okay, yes, people do like familiarity, but if you look at how much somebody loves The Matrix, if you mess with it in any way in which they will not like, the hatred will be exponential. Mm-hmm. And so you're really taking a risk, even though you think you're not taking a risk, because this is what people are familiar with, so they'll love it, and they'll definitely come and see it. I'm like, okay, so like, I don't think they care if they hate watch it or not. It's like, oh my god, they still spent. It's like burning books. It's just like, well, you still had to buy them,
right?
So we already have your money now. Thanks.
Yeah.
So.
And in fact, I can't think of a better way to put a bow on that than with a quote from the movie itself. And this is so within that like initial story where Neo doesn't know who he is, but and he's talking to his boss and creative rival, kind of like the suit of the publisher, or the face of the business side, but also kind of turns out to be kind of a wise person in his own right. And as they're having a conversation on that exact subject, he says to Neo, "I know you said the story was over for you, but that's the thing about stories, they never really end, do they? We're still telling the same stories we've always told, just with different names and faces, and I have to say I'm kind of excited." And yeah, I feel like my expectations going into this were properly tempered. I was not expecting like another. Well, for one thing, a lot of people were not big fans of the second and third movies. I actually liked The Matrix Reloaded a lot more than the average Matrix fan did, but Revolutions was not. Yeah, if it I was trying to make like another movie like The Matrix Revolutions and be like, yeah, no, that is precisely as pointless as Thomas Anderson, the video game designer, would think it is. So
right.
Yeah.
So you had go ahead.
Oh yeah, and hopefully this is where you were going. The other thing that was really significant about The Matrix Resurrections for me is that it really put the relationship between Neo and Trinity on center stage.
Yes. And
I felt like it kind of recontextualized it for the original movie. And then seeing The Matrix 1999 in the theater at the San Francisco Symphony, that was the first time I had rewatched it since seeing The Matrix Resurrections, and I did kind of feel that resonating for me. It kind of informed maybe a different perspective on these characters. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that, like, and this is another thing that really bothers me in fandoms where people are like, oh, the sequel ruins the original because it like introduces all this information that doesn't. I'm a big believer in the principle that like every viewer gets to define their own continuity. If the existence of a sequel makes the first movie worse, you just, mentally catalog it as like fanfic, or, just I'm going to read this first thing in isolation and choose to ignore the presence of the sequel. So, I'm not saying like, oh, the like character beats or plot information changed The Matrix for me. But, like I said, The Matrix Resurrections was very much kind of just like an essay with a plot attached. It was kind of like Lana Wachowski's retrospective that also had some stories and kung fu fights involved. And it just like having taken in that perspective and meditated on it a little bit, it did add it added a little bit of richness to the Matrix, and particularly where the Neo Trinity romance was involved. Hence, Happily Ever Aftermath. I think, oh yeah, now I actually think there's maybe enough there for me to want to talk about in this venue.
Yeah, and I thought that was fascinating how seeing the fourth movie led you to wanting to talk. Well, technically we're talking about all of it, and then seeing The Matrix again, it's just like, oh, we could talk about that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I know this movie is very pivotal to you, and here you are, approaching 40, and different perspectives on these. I will say one of the things that I truly appreciated is that you're right. Well, the relationship between, Neo and Trinity is center in Resurrections. I really like how much she is prominent.
Yes.
Not as something to be chased, but just, I mean, technically she was in the context of the film, but she wasn't a trophy.
Yeah. In fact, that I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, she has basically all the agency. Like the whole latter half of the plot is basically about, Neo has kind of been rescued and, given the proverbial red pill again. And that happens fairly early in the movie. I want to say between like the 45 to 60 minute mark somewhere. But the entire rest of the plot is basically, it hinges on whether Trinity is going to wake up from her Matrix life and choose to leave it behind, and she is living the life of a wife and a mother. She has a husband and I think 3 kids inside the Matrix, which unbeknownst to her are not real people. They're computer programs that are just part of the simulation, but as far as she knows, she remembers having an entire life with them, and seeing through that illusion in order to choose that, as far as she's concerned, Neo was just an amicable guy in a coffee shop who probably has a crush on her. And it's it all kind of, I'm not going to recap every beat of the story, but it all kind of stems from that. So
right. And it actually makes me think back to the first movie where it was always, blue pill, red pill. It was always the choice.
Yeah.
And it just occurred to me, oh, they yanked him out of there, didn't they? In Resurrections.
Yes.
He didn't get to choose?
No. Actually, that was... I've rewatched Resurrections more recently than you, right? No, actually, there's kind of a dialogue thing about that, and they go through that with Yahya Abdul-Mateen's character too, where Bugs, the woman who's like, she's kind of the only one who's hacking into this new Matrix, and she's kind of trying to run around and help people on their journeys of discovery as best they can, much as Morpheus did in the original, and Trinity. But basically, there's this line of dialogue that I think is repeated, that like the pills are presented as a symbolic choice, but really the choice is already made. And yeah, I think Neo is somewhat ritualistically presented with the red pill and the blue pill, but there's also some dialogue kind of saying that it's a foregone conclusion.
Okay. Well, I will say for transparency purposes, I have not rewatched The Matrix Resurrections for the podcast, because I'm going to say the focus of this was going to be the first one. So it's hazy, but
yeah,
I didn't study it as much because... that's more of the essay you had mentioned.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
It was your essay and you wanted to do homework, where I, on the other hand, I'm just like, I'm talking about The Matrix. And I'm going to use that as a segue, because if we're talking about, the quote from the beginning, the Oracle, and the fact that Trinity was told in the end, it was her line.
The Oracle has done a lot of the heavy lifting for this podcast, which I appreciate.
So. Absolutely. So it's helpful because, Trinity said to Neo, the Oracle told me that I would fall in love with the one. Yes. Not the exact words, but that was ultimately that. So you can't be dead because I love you. And
Right.
so that's a whole thing. The Oracle told her that
He dies a lot.
Resurrections.
Yes.
Jesus, one, Neo, Morpheus. I don't know. The Oracle told Trinity
Yes.
this. So now we're talking about destiny. And
Right.
now we're being told that she would fall in love. But then the question is there a choice? Is there not a choice? When you know that you're being told that you would fall in love.
And a lot of this like fate stuff, kind of like a lot of the little like philosophical, metaphysical puzzles hinge on that. And okay, brief aside, I'm going to try to exercise as much discretion as I can not to go into all of these like pop philosophy things there
are books that
yes
can do that.
But yeah, it kind of is this question of like, is there anything like supernatural or paranormal going on, at least even within this question of destiny and fate, that like, that governs that with regard to like the Oracle and the One, because like,
like, was Trinity programmed to love him?
Or yeah, I mean that could be a question, because like,
well, there's also the mind in the Matrix versus the mind there. If she's programmed in the Matrix, will she bring it out with her?
Yeah, that's actually something that I considered a while back, because like, you get very used to the idea that all of the paranormal stuff that got, all of the physically impossible stunts are a matter of like the Matrix programming, that it can only happen within this computer simulation, and if you can basically hack the simulation with your brain, you can make things that should be impossible happen. But Neo and company don't have any superpowers outside of the Matrix, obviously, because that's just regular physical reality, and they can't do special things with their minds. And then in Reloaded and Revolutions, it gets kind of weird, because they start intentionally playing with those boundaries, and it's like, by virtue of being the One, does he have supernatural powers outside of the Matrix? And a lot of fans got very grumbly about that. But if you look back, like, okay, so the Oracle, also a computer program within the Matrix, a very special one who, again, within the rules of the Matrix, she can do things that most others can't, including predicting the future. But if she made an accurate prediction that Trinity would fall in love with the One, and most of that falling in love happened when she was not connected to the computers, that suggests that, the Oracle had some sort of paranormal power that goes outside of the Matrix, if she could accurately predict what was going to happen with Trinity's feelings as she was, interacting with Neo on the ship in the real world. And yeah, like you were saying, that goes to like, well, I mean, could you somehow mess with that boundary by like analyzing Trinity's brain while she's connected to the Matrix and making some kind of extrapolation, or did a programmer, like you said? And having that realization back in the aughts when the sequels were coming out, it at least gave me a little bit of comfort that like some of the seeds were planted for some of this like magical things extending beyond the boundaries of the Matrix. But that's a little bit outside of the scope, so I'll just reel it back here.
Well, also, how much of it is hero worship evolving into love? Because I'm just like, oh my God, he is the one who's going to save all of us. He is the one who is, the answer to how we're going to save humanity. Mm-hmm. And that could really translate pretty easily.
Yeah. And even setting aside the more, nitpicky science fiction, people complaining on the internet kind of stuff, it does go back to the central question of like, there was a prophecy of Trinity falling in love with the One. And
there was still a question of whether or not he was the One, so that's helpful.
And do you accept that? And like the Oracle is talking very much to Neo about like, hey, I understand that you don't believe in fate, and you might not have liked the prediction that I just gave you, but you're going to decide that you don't believe in the prediction anyway, which is fine. And in fact, her prediction, like, she intentionally gave a false prediction, because she said that like either Neo or Morpheus would be killed, and they both ultimately survived the movie. So
they both survived the movie, but to be fair, Neo died, so she still was correct.
Yeah, that's true. Which is another like thing that should be impossible. The fact that his heart stopped in the real world and then it started again, and it's like, does the cybernetic hook up, is it able to defibrillate him, or did his heart restarting in the real world, is that itself something paranormal that should not have been able to happen, other than the One actually being fated and special, etc.? And again, I'm really trying hard not to get into that rabbit hole, but it's a little bit unavoidable, considering, like, if we're talking about Trinity falling in love with Neo, there's like very much this kind of like yin yang of it was fated, but this is also all about people defying fate. So,
you're bringing it up in the context of what we're trying to say here, so that's
and I guess I would say, like, Neo ultimately defies the Oracle's prophecy, saving Morpheus without sacrificing his own life, but
again, he did.
That's exactly my point, but also fulfilling it at the same time. And I kind of feel like, Trinity fell in love with Neo of her own free will, but also fulfilled the prophecy. I think it's like a sort of a, contradictory, but not really kind of thing. I think that's getting a little bit more into like the Eastern philosophy side of things, which I'm going to try not to comment on because I don't really consider myself an expert. But
all right. Okay, well then, if we don't want to get too far into prophecies.
Yes. Okay.
When?
Right. One observation that I made to you the other day as we were kind of getting ready for this, that I don't think I ever really thought about this before the most recent viewing, but when I was talking before about like Trinity as just kind of the like I don't want to misuse the word formulaic, but this is like a formulaic story and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it is very much a hero's journey archetype. Neo is this sympathetic protagonist who's thrust into a world he doesn't fully understand and has to undergo a personal growth arc in order to overcome an obstacle. It's the hero's journey, and like many hero's journey stories, there's this love interest there where, kind of like getting together with a girl is kind of like a part of his reward. I don't want to say that in a way to suggest that like Trinity is being objectified, but it's part of the journey.
It's what
like
happens.
He starts off, and
you did not create the formula that made it crappy.
And like by the end of the story, he's formed an emotional bond with this person that turns into a romantic bond, and that's making that's contributing to his happiness, and again, if you're looking at the movie from a certain angle, you could say like, oh, Trinity is just there to be the love interest. It kind of, rounds out this whole hero's journey, that there's this woman for him to fall in love with. And one thing that is at least a little bit atypical about that sets it apart from like a lot of other, genre movies that follow this basic archetype is that very often, and especially when the hero is male, like he is attracted to the female love interest first, and then part of the journey is that eventually that attraction is requited. And in The Matrix, it's the opposite direction. We get a lot of signals that Trinity is attracted to Neo and romantically interested in Neo before he really feels that way about her.
He was about to peace out of the car when they, show that big, gun-looking machine thing to extract the bug out of him, and he's just like, all right, I'm leaving, and she says please. Yeah. And even just the way, like, their first conversation in that nightclub, the way that she's, like, very sensuously leaning up and kind of, whispering in his ear. And also probably because, like, if you've ever had a conversation in, like, a loud dance hall, there's no way they could hear each other anyway. But I'm surprised she wasn't, like, sensuously almost pressing her tongue into his ear, but then also screaming at the top of her lungs, because that's the only way anyone would hear anything without, like, 90s industrial punk or what, I don't know the exact genre of music, but yes. And then of course the real cheat sheet here is just, again, like the Oracle, as I said, she's doing a lot of heavy lifting. That charmingly humorous bit of dialogue that you quoted at the top of the show is, I can see why she likes you, and he says who, which so not to say that he isn't necessarily at least a little bit attracted to Trinity at that point. She is gorgeous after all, but Neo is justifiably preoccupied with a lot of other stuff besides romance. Preoccupied, not to mention he's very stoic. Obviously,
he is very stoic. Yeah,
they've done an amazing job with Keanu Reeves as the role.
Yes, that's the
weird thing is, I wouldn't say he's holding a lot close to the vest right now, or in this case, he's not holding a lot close to the duster. But but you're right. There is so much shit going on right now. But at the same time, look at how is she not his dream girl?
Right.
In that, he knew about her. He knows her code name. When she introduces him, she's like, oh, I thought you were a guy.
Right. Yeah. So, her reputation precedes her.
So it is pretty interesting. But if I may answer the question.
Yes.
Because you were definitely, spitballing a lot here in trying to figure this out. So
I have maybe an answer, but yeah, that's sort of my groundwork for it. But yeah, you go ahead.
Well, for me, I just went. It's very simplistic in this movie. You're carrying the baggage of 4 movies for the emotional aspect of it, but just looking at what the first movie has to offer, for me, it's pretty straightforward. Where when Neo decides that he's going to go back for Morpheus, even though they have escaped the Matrix, it's very easy for that particular moment, for her to just be like, oh, okay, yes. Because all that she thinks she might know, and didn't he already reveal that he got the news that he's not the one?
Yes.
And he has that news. Did he share that with her?
He shared that with her as they were having the conversation about whether to go in and rescue Morpheus.
Right. So here she is.
Oh, and incidentally, she was like very close to telling Neo about her prophecy, like at least twice.
Yeah.
Like you get the sense that she's almost going to tell him before he sees the Oracle, and then gets even closer to it as when he says the Oracle told me I'm not the one. She looks visibly confused because that's contradicting her own prophecy,
right?
Which suggests very strongly, if not conclusively, that she already thinks of herself as having fallen in love with Neo.
That's weird. Well, it's interesting. If we're gonna pop back and forth, I think I'm in love with you. Because I'm trying to remember in this scene, it's like I don't think she's like, did she ask? I swear I remember the scene where he actually doesn't answer, but he just kind of gives a look that implies that the answer was a negative.
Which scene is this?
I'm trying to remember. No,
I know they definitely got explicit about it as they were having the conversation about whether it was worth going back into the Matrix to try to rescue Morpheus.
Yeah, and then he says, yeah.
Yeah. Because it was about what Morpheus was fighting for. Like, we need to honor Morpheus' sacrifice. He stayed behind in order to protect the One, and is like, well, I'm not the One, so we might as well try to bring him back. It's okay to risk my life to save his because I'm not the One.
I think that helps solidify my thing right now, because when he wants to go back in, and she thinks, oh, I'm in love with him, and well, again, the solidifying it, because he's like, no, I'm not the One, and so that's actually giving her back her agency. I'm in love with him because I'm in love with him, not because this prophecy told me I'm in love with him.
Once again, setting aside the fate,
Not to mention the fact that, he's actually going to go back for Morpheus as well. So he is in this for the greater good of it, even though he is not the one who was prophesized. So therefore, I am solidly saying it's when he decides to go back in there. That is when she falls in love with him. And she's doing it in a solid way because this is her choosing, not because of the actual prophecy.
Yeah. You make a great point that at every point in this story, Trinity is not short on her own agency, and then even more so in the Matrix Resurrections.
Right.
Movies number 2 and 3, maybe not so much, but that's
So that's for her, in my opinion, for the sake of the podcast. For Neo, I'm going to say it's when she's like, all right, fine, I'm going with you. He's like, no, you can't. And she's like, all right, fine, but you know what? I am actually the acting captain of this ship now.
Yes, that is, again, on the theme of agency, that that she's the highest ranking officer on the ship, and that she goes with him with it. Yeah. It
just feels right in the movie.
Okay, yeah. So I hope you don't think I'm slacking too much, but I think my answers are basically identical to yours.
How is it slacking when the movie only gives you so much to work with?
The movie actually, I mean, not only does it give you only so much to work with, but it's
for this aspect.
It's pretty definitive in what it gives you. It's like the movie is the movie is not subtle about the beats of this romance, and I don't mean that as a critique.
It's
I think
not the point of the movie.
It doesn't need to be subtle. Yeah, again, this is not primarily a love story, and I feel like the bluntness of it works to the movie's credit in that way. And in fact, going back to the kind of like formula, again, not calling it formulaic as an insult, but the way it's kind of like using the formula for all it's worth and building on the archetype. One of the other things you will see in and I have only a layperson's knowledge of this, but like in like screenwriting classes, when they kind of say like the basic formula for this like adventure story or hero's journey, there's the first part where the hero's kind of like being exposed to all these unfamiliar things and trying to adapt to it, and there's this like crucial moment in the like center point of the story where before the hero has been reacting and then they start acting, and like that moment where Neo decides to go back into the Matrix, because like up to that point he was literally fleeing for his life. And before he was fleeing for his life, he was, going where Morpheus told him to go and learn, absorbing as much information as he can. And yeah, it's like, again, it's not subtle, but not in a bad way. There's like a little musical sting that accompanies it and everything, and you can practically see like a caption up on the screen, like Neo is done reacting, now he's acting, and like that is, not just the dramatic or plot-based turning point of the movie. It's also very much the emotional turning point of the movie, because that's where Neo has all of his agency, and that's very much punctuated by that's when he completely begins kicking ass in these action scenes too. That's when the guns come out, the lots of guns, and everything is all jaw-dropping stunts and techno music, and
we're gonna need a lot of guns.
Yeah, and I think it makes perfect sense that is also the kind of like turning point for the romance, because it's the turning point for everything in the story. And why should the romance be different? It just works that way, and it works very well. So
Okay, well, it's not cheating.
Yeah, I know.
It's what it is. Have you not heard me do this podcast before where I'm just like, yeah, I like what you said?
Okay, good.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Well, now the harder question.
Yes.
What happens next?
Okay, so you alluded before to your own little rules about like what constitutes continuity for purposes of this podcast.
There's precedent established, and because this is my show,
right,
I am a stickler, and when we have the same writers.
What was the original precedent? It was that ice skating movie. What was that one called?
The Cutting Edge.
The Cutting Edge. Yeah, I think that was the first episode this came up. No, was it before that?
That was the first time it came up. So
okay.
so the Cutting Edge was, well, there were all these sequels. I'm like, yeah, but we didn't have the same actors and the same writers and the same, and it evolved. I'm just like, well, hey, those were completely different, writing and all this other stuff, and the characters were taken by different people, so it's not. So I choose to ignore it, and then we did Beyond Sunrise. Mm-hmm. And Paulina was very, very, very specific about how she's like, well, I can't steer away from the trilogy. And it came up that it was the same actors, same writers, and same director. Mm-hmm. And so she's like, oh, okay, well then I'm holding it. I'm like, all right, you're setting precedent right now. And so when we hit, all of these different things, that's when precedent was set for me, and I am a stickler.
Okay, I can.
But
even though I've repeatedly reminded you that it's your show and you can do whatever you want,
and I
respect the consistency.
But here's the thing: we're missing a writer and director.
That's true. Is this the first time that's come up? Does it have to be when there are multiple writer directors for the original? Does it have to be all of them, or is only one of them enough?
This is a new twist. Thanks, The Matrix.
So is it like a quantum superposition of in and out of continuity? And
it's not quantum.
You have to
No.
You have to open the box to see whether the black cat is there twice.
Or... Why is there a cat in a box?
I was making a quantum physics, the Schrodinger's cat thing.
No, I know that, but I don't want a cat in a box.
Okay, the cat can be in the shrink's office.
Wait.
Yeah, okay.
Did the cat go into the box because it wanted to be in the box?
Have you met a cat before? I probably did.
Then I'm okay with it.
Okay, good.
And I'm safe again.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, geez, I said I thought I was going to be able to get away with being a little bit lighter on the spoilers for the Matrix Resurrections, because I know like probably not nearly as many people have seen that.
Well, important question.
Okay.
Are you maintaining that what happened in Reloaded and Revolutions and Resurrections is...
Well, if I'm gonna keep Resurrections, I definitely have to keep Reloaded and Revolutions.
So you are going to keep Resurrections?
Oh, yeah. Oh, to that, the answer is definitely yes. I mean, I don't think we'd be doing this episode right now if I hadn't seen Resurrections.
No, I got that. But at the same time, we're talking about the first movie.
Yeah.
This is, at the end. What happens after The Matrix? Not. You can say that you're going to keep the rest.
Yeah,
I withhold the right to not necessarily.
I mean, thinking about what happened after The Matrix,
That breaks my own rule. Never mind. Continue.
I was going to say, I remember feeling a little bit uneasy about there being sequels, just because The Matrix is such a perfectly self-contained movie. It ends on a nominally open-ended note, but also one where the hero is omnipotent. So, you can't really imagine that much more of a continuation than like he fulfills his destiny. He brings freedom to the people who are still trapped in the Matrix, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the sequel was inevitable. I wanted to see another Matrix movie as much as anyone else did, and of course it was kind of a rocky road creatively. A lot of ink has been spilled about that already. The kind of compromises that they had to make in order to continue the story, and some of which included retconning. Well, wait, how omnipotent is he exactly? And then, yeah, I guess. Okay, so if you've listened this far without having seen Resurrections, I thank you, and you can just go ahead and turn the podcast off right now and go see it if I've convinced you that it's good, because I will now spoil basically the very ending, which is essentially that they have Neo and Trinity have, of course, found each other and regained their identities from before, and furthermore kind of reestablished their control over the environment that Neo had as the one, and Trinity kind of shares that power at this point. And I found it really interesting that the whole story does kind of take place in the utopian Matrix that was kind of like recreated in the climax of Revolutions, and it was sort of the story set against it's this more peaceful, balanced thing where the machines and the humans aren't at war, and there's this much smaller, more kind of localized conflict between Neo and this one program, the character played by Neil Patrick Harris, who was kind of exploiting him. And their victory was not so much in like breaking the Matrix in two, but just removing that character, the Neil Patrick Harris character from control, and like, we're going to run things ourselves. We're going to remake this place. We're going to I forget the exact line of dialogue, but basically, create it in our own image for the people who are still living in this Matrix. And and to me, that like kind of resonated with the earlier parts of the movie, particularly the parts where Neo was a video game developer in San Francisco. And speaking as someone who in real life, I work, in software in San Francisco, not in video game development, but in, I've had my share of startup culture, and definitely appreciated sort of the fun that was being poked at a bunch of like, young people in this like open plan office, sitting on couches and beanbag chairs and whatnot, and pitching their somewhat vacuous ideas around, and the one word, bullet time. And that's 2 words. But in spite of that, I find myself feeling uncynical about the whole, like, this is about blank canvases and creativity, and the fact that the final shot of the movie, I think, was Neo and Trinity against the San Francisco skyline, kind of brought that back into reality for me, and thinking about like, the more positive vision of, we're creating things, we're, making the world a better place, et cetera, et cetera. The movie, I think, presents a kind of, both positive and negative view of that whole thing. But basically, I'm just gonna say, like, the movie lays out like they have this utopian future. They're alive, they're healthy, they're together, they're free to do whatever they want. And if I basically said like they make good on that vision, they live happily ever after, for lack of a better way to put it, I don't think I can really top that. Mm-hmm. And I think it might kind of be missing the point of the story if I tried.
Right.
So
so in my own rules,
mm-hmm.
I was thinking about first movie, second movie, third movie, same writers, directors,
mm-hmm.
Stars. Funny thing is that you have the same couple for the stars, but you have other people playing different characters. So mm-hmm. there is a continuity there at the very least. And I was thinking about, well, I mean, do I say that there's a missing writer in the fourth one, so therefore it's not, in canon or whatever we want to call it?
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately what I really, really liked about Resurrections it was a callback to the end of the first movie where they fly off together.
Yeah.
But what I really thought about is that the fact that they're flying off together is what's important for what I think will be happening after the fourth one. Now, I will say that after the Matrix and he flies off, you notice that still war, still a bunch of stuff. They die, they get resurrected. Yes, we're keeping all of that by the rule. But you notice that even though he maintained he's a deity and all this other stuff, and he's going to save all the world, but he's once again sacrificing himself to do that, and he's also sacrificing her to do that. I really like the way this movie it doesn't say it didn't. I guess it didn't happen. Wait, no, they did die.
They did die.
They did actually die, and then
the computers kind of like recovered their bodies, and over the course of decades, figured out how to resuscitate them.
Right, the Matrix resuscitated.
Right.
And so so they're able to do that, and I think what's fascinating about that is that you have this deity, but at the same time, this deity still failed.
You're talking about the analyst, the Neil Patrick Harris character?
No, I'm
talking about Neo.
I'm talking about Neo.
Okay,
Neo, he failed, but what I think is great is what you just had just alluded to, or what you just said is going to happen. I think it's the fact that they're together.
Yeah, that
there is strength in both of them. It's not just her, it's not just him, but even as a deity, he will fail because there is a strength in their togetherness.
Yes, absolutely. I mean that, and that happens like that's
that's
not just subtextual. That is the plot.
That's the movie, actually.
Yeah, and like the whole plan about how like the reason that this one program character brought them back is because he had this like crazy outsider idea to improve efficiency of the Matrix, but only worked when they were together.
Right. So they had to keep separating them.
Right. Only worked when they were both there and not too close, not too far.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing with where we had sort of this unrequited desire to get back together with her was critical to the whole thing.
Right.
Which, for the plot, I'll hold my tongue because there's a whole other like discussion on that. But I would just say go see the movie.
But that piece of it is actually pretty important. It's the fact that, when they're so far apart from each other, it's no good. They have to be just the right amount of apart. Mm-hmm. Because if it's too far, then blows up.
Yeah.
And when they're together, it blows up in a different way.
And I'm sure that's a symbolic analogy for something very interesting.
God, that just makes me really like them more and more.
Yeah.
I came around to what you said. It's like, that really does put a nice perspective on their relationship in the beginning.
I'm glad.
Because it really speaks to us. When we first got together, we were, hell, when we first got married. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, sure, we were together, but, there was still a lot of work to do. Yeah. And here we are a big chunk of time later, and look at what we can accomplish together.
Oh, that's very sweet.
We're going to save San Francisco.
Yeah, we are.
I'm not going to San Francisco.
We're gonna save San Francisco from the crappy vacuous startups with better startups.
And blackjack.
And blackjack. And error monitoring.
And my banjo. So yeah, it feels like I'm leaping on your ending, but
well, thank you. Yeah, well, I leapt on your when they fall in love, so
the movie made it.
Yeah.
But we just talked a lot about the Matrix, and dang, I like them together.
I'm glad,
and I like that they're friends in real life. The actors.
Yeah, they are apparently, which is very cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, a lot of fans hope they would get together romantically, but no, that's just
no, it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. No, it's perfectly fine. That yeah. And one last, not to be too superficial about it, but how much does it help the Matrix Resurrections that like we have these two like romantic leads who are both in their 50s, I think, and look amazing, incidentally.
Well, again, it's unfortunate that it has to be like we already love them together, so let's get them together again, and we already know these characters. But no, it's this is such a huge love story. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It just happens to be that we happen to have 3 movies that really give us the opportunity for us to jump in where we are and keep going. So it's nice. It's sad that there aren't some fresher ones out there where you have to start from the origin.
Yeah. But there's a quote about
actually, it just kind of made me sad though but is it also perpetuating the whole like you fall in love young and you're with them forever because they're the one, and you're the one.
Only if you believe in fate, I guess. But yeah, here I guess I can whip out another quote from Resurrections. Nothing comforts anxiety like a little nostalgia.
Oh. No, it can, as long as it's the right nostalgia.
Well, sure.
I mean, if I start watching a movie and I'm just like, oh, this is more rapey than I remember, that's bad.
Well, luckily not in this case.
Well, I mean,
Cypher,
yeah.
except for Cypher,
Damn
a little
it,
bit,
Cypher.
yeah, kind of.
Didn't appreciate that shorthand. I'm just like, okay, he wants to do it for his own reasons, but it's Trinity. It's always for a woman.
Yeah,
she's not your toy.
Yeah, apparently Cypher's motivations were very different in the first draft of the script, but once again, I'll say I'll try not to get sidetracked into that, but you can Google it if you want.
There's a lot to read about with The Matrix.
Turns out, yeah.
All right, so anything else you want to cover?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for doing all the heavy lifting.
Oh yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Yeah, like I said, this movie definitely had a lot of pent up significance, but it kind of took those last few pieces to fall into place to really make it, about this. So yeah, thanks for giving me the chance to talk about something that's really significant.
All right. Well, you're welcome. Okay. So whatever it is that you want to chime in about the Matrix, Matrix Resurrections. We're not going to talk about the two middle ones.
I mean, you can if you want to. And the Animatrix, for that matter, which I still need to see one of these days.
Oh, well, I'll see if the symphony is playing it. You can reach us at Twitter and Instagram at HEAMCast, HEAMCAST. We're on Facebook at Happily Ever Aftermath. And for longer thoughts, contact at HEAMCast.com.
Yeah, and I'm at Ryan Skonnord on Twitter. You can, if you can't spell that, just look in the retweets for HEAMCast. I'll be in there somewhere.
And that's it for me.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Until next time, may your aftermath be happy.